Greetings to all who follow our story, and who are not indifferent to me and my voiceovers. I hope such people come to these videos only with a subscription, right? In this installment, we are waiting for events that will show how closely intertwined the past and present can be when the most unexpected characters return to the scene. Our protagonist will encounter people he might have wanted to forget about, but fate has its own plans. How will it turn out for him? What surprises have his old acquaintances prepared? Stay tuned to find out how these exciting events unfold. And if you want to know the full story, don't forget that it's already available on our Patreon. The most important thing is hope. Chapter 10. I think so, Ryan said. Justice nodded his head. An eye for an eye, eh? Asked Justice. He did that to your eye in the Middle East, and you repaid him in kind. I can understand that. Your idea of biblical justice, huh? How do you know that? Asked Ryan. Justice shrugged. It's my job to know, he said. I can tell a lot about a person by looking into their eyes. Or, in your case, by the eyes. Justice stood up and looked out the window. It's been a while since I've been in these parts. A lot has changed over the years. Ryan was perplexed as to what he was talking about. Sure, there had been a lot of improvements and new buildings over the years, but he'd seen pictures of the town and knew it was still pretty much the same as it had been 40 years ago. Just a nice, quiet, peaceful little town, Ryan said, and I get paid to keep it that way. Justice turned and looked at him. Yes, it is, Justice said. You know, when Sheriff Coltrane first appointed you to this position, a lot of us, myself included, thought it was a mistake. It doesn't happen often, but I'm man enough to admit I was wrong. He held out his hand. Ryan stood up and accepted it. Thanks, Ranger. It means a lot to you, Ryan said. Justice smiled and nodded his head. Well, it's certainly not every day I meet someone who can make a man's heart clench into a lump just by looking at him, Justice said. Ryan was shocked. He was sure no one knew what had happened that day at the courthouse with Jake. You know, you remind me a lot of an old friend of mine. They once said about him that he could overcome the gates of hell with a bucket of water, Justice said. I just wanted to look you in the face and see if you were that kind of person, and I believe you are. Well, I'm honored, Ranger, Ryan said. If there's anything I or my department can do to help the Rangers, feel free to ask. Justice smiled grimly at Ryan as they shook hands. I'll remember that, Sheriff Caldwell, Justice said. Take care of your woman, you hear? I will, Ranger, Ryan said. Justice nodded his head. We'll see you around, he said, turning toward the door. Have a good day, you hear? Will do, Ranger, Ryan said. And so will you. A chill ran down Ryan's back as he watched the Ranger walk through the office, tipping his hat as he passed Sergeant Bledsoe. He sat down at his computer again and looked up when he heard what he thought was the pounding of hooves on the pavement. Looking outside, however, he saw nothing. Maybe I'm going crazy, he thought to himself, and went back to work. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. He looked up and saw Sergeant Bledsoe. Yes, Sergeant, what can I do for you? He asked. Sheriff, if you don't mind me asking, what did that Ranger want? She asked. Says the investigation is over, and it was a good shooting, Ryan said. I don't see why they'd send a Ranger to let us know about it. Don't they use email? Who knows these days? She asked with a smile. May I speak plainly, Sheriff? Always, Sergeant, Ryan said. What's on your mind? The other deputies and I have talked, she began. We were a little concerned at first when Sheriff Coltrane appointed you to the position. I mean, you have no law enforcement experience and all. I can understand that, Ryan said. I was concerned too. I think I can say on behalf of everyone here that we're all glad to have you with us, she said with a smile. Thank you, Elaine, he said, addressing her by name. It means a lot to me. To tell you the truth, I'm glad to be here with all of you too. She smiled when he said that. That's all I had, Sheriff, she said. I better get back to work. Ryan nodded his head. Yeah, me too, he said. 2 weeks later, he and Beverly received notice from the county. The council had nominated them for praise, and the governor and the state attorney general would be coming to present the awards. Personally, Ryan didn't think he deserved the award. In his opinion, he was just doing his job. However, he was glad that they had decided to reward Beverly. Nevertheless, he put on his best uniform and accompanied Beverly to the courthouse where the award was to take place. As he listened to the governor's speech, he thought about the one-eyed sheriff receiving a commendation from a governor confined to a wheelchair. He watched proudly and smiled as the Attorney General placed the award around Beverly's slender neck. Then it was his turn. After the governor presented him with a certificate of commendation, he addressed the audience with a few brief remarks, which he concluded by saying, "And let this be a fair warning to those who come here to make trouble. Don't mess with Texas." Everyone applauded loudly, including Ryan and Beverly. After the congratulations were over, Beverly whispered in his ear. 2 weeks later, Ryan sat in his upstairs bedroom and put on his tuxedo. Today was the day he and Beverly had been waiting for, the day they would become husband and wife. Beverly, being the strong woman she was, had weathered the incident with Weston beautifully, despite the initial shock. As he was getting dressed, he looked out the window and saw a gleaming white helicopter land on his pistol range. He saw the familiar logo on the side and wondered what was going on. It was an emblem he hadn't seen in about 4 years. He knew Jim was planning to fly them to Las Vegas for their honeymoon, but he hadn't expected this. He was shocked when he saw Jim climb out of the helicopter in a fresh uniform. "What the hell?" he asked himself. He ran down the stairs and reached the kitchen just as Jim walked in there. "Jim," he said. "What the hell?" Jim smiled and shook his hand. "Like it," said Jim, showing off his uniform with gold wings and gold stripes on the sleeve. "Looks good," Ryan said. "But, looks like my boss just showed up," Jim said. "Boss?" asked Ryan. Jim pointed out the front window. Ryan looked out and saw a large white limousine pull up in front of the house. Ryan ran outside just as the door opened. 2 fairly young men of Middle Eastern descent stepped out of it. One of them held the door open, and a very familiar figure in a gleaming white robe stepped out. He held out his hand, which included the hand of a very attractive Middle Eastern woman. Ryan walked out the door and met them at the gate. "Sheikh Abdullah," Ryan said. "As-salam alaikum," he added, and shook the man's outstretched hand. The man smiled and replied, "Wa alaikum as-salam, Ryan. It's good to see you too, my old friend." "I'm surprised," Ryan said. "I wasn't expecting you." The old man smiled and nodded his head. "I just finished some business and thought I'd pay you a visit," he said. "This is, how shall I put it, the icing on the cake. If I may, let me introduce you to my wife Aliyah," he said, turning slightly to the short woman beside him. Ryan knew the sheik wasn't as traditionalist as other Middle Eastern men, but he didn't want to offend him or his wife, so he put his right hand to the left side of his chest and bowed slightly, greeting her. She smiled and did the same. "And my oldest sons, Muhammad and Ibrahim," the sheikh said. Ryan shook their hands and greeted them as well. "I understand you have spent some time in our country," Muhammad said. "Yes," Ryan said. "I worked for your father at one time, but I never got to know his family." "My sons were in college at the time," Sheikh says. "Harvard Business School. Now they can prove that I didn't waste money on their education." Ryan grinned. "Please come inside," Ryan said. He opened the gate for them and led them inside. The house was already full of guests, but Ryan found Bob and waved him in. "Sheikh, this is my son-in-law, Robert Green," Ryan said. Bob shook the sheikh's hand, then Muhammad's and Ibrahim's. He nodded to Aliyah, noticing that Ryan didn't shake her hand. "So you're the machine gunner, right?" the sheikh asked. Bob smiled mischievously and nodded his head. "Yeah, that's what they used to call me," he said. "It suits you," said the sheikh. "Jim told me about you. I've been following your career at the Department of Commerce. That report you wrote on how to make Amtrak profitable was quite interesting." "Did you read it?" asked Bob in surprise. "Oh yes," said the sheikh. "It's a pity your government will never accept it. It makes too much sense." They all laughed. "Personally, I think your talents are wasted in the Ministry of Commerce. Perhaps it's time for you to spread your wings and take on new challenges." "I don't know what else I'd do," Bob said. You might want to work for me, the sheik said. Work for you? Asked Bob. Do what? Well, it's going to be in the news soon anyway, so I might as well tell you, said the sheik. As you know, there's a shake-up going on at Knight Petroleum right now. Shares are down, confidence is down, the whole infrastructure is crumbling. Yeah, I've been following it, Bob said. Well, I just made a deal to acquire her, the sheik said. Bob looked shocked. Yes, we now control almost 75% of the company's shares and we've made a deal. It has to be approved by your government, but right now it is a mere formality. We are now in the process of recruiting new management, who will begin work as soon as the transition is approved. All members of the old management team are leaving, and the new management will be in place within days. I just need a new CFO, and I felt it was time to get some new blood in. Would you be interested in the position? Wow, Bob said, excited. Yes, sir, I'd like that. Very much. Excellent, the sheik said. Let's meet after the festivities and discuss the details of the acquisition and your compensation package. That sounds amazing, sheik. Thank you, Bob said. The sheik turned to Ryan again and took the envelope from Mohammed. He held it out to Ryan. I hope you don't mind, the sheik said. A little wedding present. I have put my helicopter and pilot at your disposal for a week and have taken the liberty of upgrading your reservation. At my insistence, you and your beautiful bride will now live in a penthouse suite, and I have given you some money for your travel expenses. Thank you, sheik. You didn't have to do that, Ryan said. I know, but I wanted to, the older man said. Enjoy yourself, please. After all, how often do you get to visit Las Vegas? Very true, Ryan said. Please accept my sincere thanks. By the way, where is your beautiful bride? The sheik asked. She's upstairs with my daughter getting ready, Ryan said. Traditionally, the bride is not supposed to show her face until the wedding starts. Ah, I see, said the sheik. Then, Mr. Green, would you mind escorting us to our seats? Absolutely, said Bob. Then I'd better get back. I'm father's best man. The sheik nodded approvingly. Ryan watched as they walked out and opened the envelope. His eyes widened when he saw a prepaid Visa card. The card attached to it said it contained $100,000. A small gift indeed. However, he knew it was chump change to the sheik. He looked around the house and thought about what he had gone through to get to this point in his life. The place was full of friends, both old and new. His old crew, Bill, Buster, Ian, Jim, and Cap, were all here, along with Jorge, Jay Goldsmith, all the off-duty sheriff's deputies, and of course Russell. Several members of the Board of County Commissioners were present as well. He hoped there was enough food and drink for everyone. He was glad there was enough room in the backyard for everyone to park. There were quite a few of Beverly's friends among them, as well as a few neighbors. One person was missing, however. He looked outside and saw a dark SUV pull into the driveway. As it stopped, he saw Agent Smith get out of the car and open the passenger door for his wife. Ryan smiled as he greeted his friend. I didn't think you guys could do it, Ryan said. Wouldn't miss this event for anything, Smith said. He introduced his wife, Gloria, and Buster escorted them to their seats. Ryan looked at his watch and realized it was time to go. He checked himself one last time in the mirror and then headed for the exit. He stood at the outdoor altar with Bob, Ian, and Cap. Everyone turned as the wedding march sounded in the outdoor area. Everyone smiled as little Ryan walked down the aisle, scattering flower petals in front of the procession. Bob stood by Ryan as he watched his bride-to-be walk down the aisle with Russell at her side, preceded by Sarah, Elaine Bledsoe, and Trish Calloway, one of Beverly's longtime friends. Beverly seemed so beautiful he had to remind himself to breathe. As they approached the altar, the pastor asked, "Who gives this woman in marriage?" On behalf of the community of Hard Rock, Texas, I agree, Russell said. Everyone smiled. The ceremony was an uplifting affair, and it was all filmed and streamed live for the benefit of Beverly's son, who couldn't tear himself away from his studies at the Naval Academy. A few days before the wedding, Ryan was finally able to Skype with him, and they got along great. When it was finished, the pastor asked them to stand up to face the audience. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Caldwell to you for the first time, the pastor said, prompting a round of applause from everyone. The reception went well, with a local band playing an eclectic mix of country, bluegrass, and rock music. There was plenty of food and drinks, and everyone had a good time reminiscing and dancing. Everyone came over to wish the newlyweds all the best, and Ryan was glad that no one had ruined the day by mentioning Lisa. They didn't need to. Ryan already knew her situation thanks to Jorge, Sarah, and the others. Having lost most of her fortune, she had been forced to sell her mansion and was now in a nursing home, undergoing treatment that could last for years. On top of that, she was still considered complicit in much of what Jake, Elmer, and the board of directors were doing. The only thing that kept her out of jail was her cooperation and physical condition. Timmy, who shot Lisa, was facing about 10 years in prison thanks to a deal his lawyers made with federal prosecutors. A number of Knight's middle and lower level managers also went to prison for various crimes. Police in England have yet to solve the Blackstone case, but have been working through all leads with the help of the FBI. The class action lawsuit was still moving slowly through the system, and Ryan figured he'd never get a dime from it. Still, he was pleased to know that Knight's legacy would always be remembered with shame. Authorities attributed the attack on Knight's compound to a drug cartel operating south of the border, and Smith traveled to Washington, D.C., where he was to serve as deputy director in charge of bringing order to the agency. All in all, Ryan thought, things had worked out well. He and Beverly still hadn't settled all the details regarding their two homes, but he knew they would eventually. Beverly's egg business was doing well, and she had mentioned expanding it and possibly hiring a couple people, turning her old house into office space. "I just want to say thank you for staying to watch my chickens," Beverly said to Sarah and Bob. "I hope I'm not asking for too much." "Nonsense, Mom," Sarah said. "I'm a veterinarian, remember. This is a very nice thing to do. Besides, you two deserve to be together." "Are you sure you can handle all this?" Ryan asked Bob, handing him the keys to the house. "Don't worry, Dad," Bob told him. "Sarah and I will take care of it." "And we'll help him, won't we, boys?" asked Buster. Cap, Ian, Bill, and Jorge nodded their heads. "Okay," Ryan said. "Thanks for everything." "No problem, Dad," Bob said. "You guys go have fun." Ryan turned to Russell. "Do you have everything under control?" he asked. Russell laughed. "Oh, I think we can survive a week without you," he said, laughing. "Go on, your helicopter is waiting." Ryan and Beverly said their goodbyes and ran through the crowd of well-wishers throwing rice. They made it to the helicopter, and Jim closed the door as they climbed in. Jim had already loaded their luggage into the helicopter, and they were ready to depart. After the door closed, a sign on one of the rear windows read, "Just married. I'm sorry," Cap whispered to Sheikh Abdullah. "I couldn't help myself." "No problem," the Sheikh said. "It'll keep Jim busy." They all laughed. Ryan and Beverly waved to them from the helicopter. They watched the plane slowly rise, then turn and head north. "Think they'll join the Mile High Club on this thing?" Buster asked. The Sheikh smiled. "It wouldn't be the first time. It's a lot more comfortable than that rickety old thing Jim likes to mess around with." "Do you think Ryan finally found what he was looking for?" asked Ian. Sheikh nodded his head. "I think so," he said. Sarah looked at him in confusion. "What was he looking for?" she asked. Sheikh looked at the helicopter, which was almost out of sight. "Peace," he said, "and the justice of the Father." The 10th part of this story perfectly concludes a multi-layered and gripping plot that reveals not only the characters' actions, but also their inner experiences and motivations. Just like you, my dear viewer, should have grabbed your mouse and clicked that damn subscribe button a long time ago. Important themes such as justice, redemption, and the search for inner peace find their resolution in the climactic events. On a psychological level, the ending of the story reveals deep internal transformations of the characters. Ryan, who throughout the narrative has been fighting not only external enemies but also his own demons, finally finds what he has been searching for so long: peace and inner satisfaction. His admission that he was just doing his job, even when he is rewarded for his heroism, emphasizes his humility and desire to live a quiet life without striving for fame or recognition. The relationships between the characters also play a key role in the development of the plot. For example, Ryan's tender and caring attitude towards Beverly demonstrates his readiness for a new life in which he no longer has to be a warrior, but can become a loving husband. Meeting Sheikh Abdullah and other old friends emphasizes the importance of maintaining ties with the past, which not only remind us of the trials we have gone through, but also show that the world does not stand still. Everyone is moving forward, striving for a better future. Particular attention should be paid to the theme of justice, which runs like a red thread throughout the story. The characters' actions are often motivated by the desire to restore balance and punish the guilty. At the end of the story, we see that justice prevails, but not always in the way expected. The fate of Lisa and Timmy is a clear example of this. They receive their punishments, but instead of vengeful joy, it causes a feeling of relief and closure. This journey showed how important it is to find your own path, even if it is difficult and full of trials. Ryan found his way through acceptance, forgiveness, and love, which ultimately allowed him to find the peace he longed for. Thank you for being with us on this journey. You can already find the full version of the story on our Patreon. Subscribe to stay up to date with future stories and exclusive content. See you in the next stories.